Hello there, it's still June and it's the 10th of June 2019 and this is Broadcasting Scotland at 7. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have Keith Brown with me, Deputy Leader of the SNP, and we've got a folder full of stuff today, so I haven't got my piles of paper, which has been mentioned to me before. And it's lovely to see you, Keith.
Nice to see you.
And thanks for coming in. So I thought we might just start off with something that came in just a few minutes ago. Ian Blackford was talking about the Tory party leadership. He says that they've been nasal gazing down in Westminster there. The European Union agreed to a further extension of Article 50 in April, but the Tories have wasted the crucial time with navel-gazing, leaving the UK rudderless as it hurtles towards a no-deal Brexit, an outcome which would be devastating for jobs in Scotland, living standards and the economy. Agreed?
Certainly, and you can see the first evidence of that perhaps from the GDP figures announced today, a reduction in 0.4%. So the Tories are allowing the economy to go to rack and ruin at the same time, as Ian Blackford says, as they're undertaking this navel-gazing. And as they're taking their various unicorns about what they can do in terms of the Brexit process around the paddock, there is nobody coming forward with a realistic proposal. And as you say, the EU said to us, don't waste the time.
And also, this when you start to talk about a decrease in the economy of the GDP, and that the information that came out earlier that the government in Westminster thought it would be at 6% decrease, and we're quite worried about a 0.4% decrease, and so you can see the scale of that is going to be phenomenal if we come out without a deal from the Brexit thing, and if we come out at all, it's going to be catastrophic.
Well, that's right. I think the economists are saying that 0.4% reduction is mainly due to the changed timetable for Brexit from the 29th of March. But it's also true to say that it's now cost, we're told, £66 billion to the UK economy, the various costs that have been attributed to Brexit, as well as between £2 and £3 trillion of investment going elsewhere. So whilst the Tory party is involved in this charade, this shambolic leadership election, there are serious issues that have to be addressed, and they're not being addressed. It's a dereliction of duty by the Conservative Party across the UK and here in Scotland.
Well, shall we go through the candidates that would pick up this dereliction if they get elected? There's 10 in the bed at the moment, apparently. I think one fell out this afternoon. So, I'll just read out the list. It's in no particular order. But the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, he had a weekend of it, didn't he?
I don't know if he was at a party or not, but yes, he seems to have had quite a weekend.
You don't want to say any more about that then? Okay, fair enough, I understand. Health Secretary, which is quite a leap from Michael Gove's cocaine snorting. Then we get to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Anything to say about him?
Not really. There's not much of a campaign. It seems to be very pitched towards young people, but we know that the average age of a Conservative voter is 57. So I'm not sure he is really looking at the constituency he first has to win, which of course is the Tory MPs, but we shall see.
Yeah, because it goes from the Tory MPs then out to the membership, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But they've got to get it down to 2 and then pass it on to the membership at large.
That's right. So the average age of the Tory member is around 57. The MPs will be somewhat younger, but there's not that many young people that he's going to win on the basis of a direct pitch to young people at the exclusion of everything else.
Okay, so then we've got the former Chief Whip, Mark Harper.
I know, not well known by people. I'm almost surprised that he managed to get the 8 names necessary to go forward, but we'll see what happens in the next round.
And then we've got the Foreign Secretary, and it is ours because that's one of the reserve matters, but it's Jeremy Hunt, who didn't really understand if his wife was Chinese or Japanese a few weeks ago.
Well, that's right, and also he's made some, I suppose, unprompted remarks about abortion, which have caused quite a lot of consternation, especially amongst women's groups, seeking to limit, or saying he would prefer to limit the age or the duration for people having abortions, which is quite serious. Having said that, I do detect there's growing support for him. You've seen today his campaign launch was with Penny Mordaunt and with Amber Rudd. And so I think he is, in the context of this Tory fiasco, I think he is certainly in with a chance.
I suppose he's seen as a kind of a middle rather than being the extreme of the right and the extreme of the left. He
and
comes
also
across that way.
he was a Remainer, which may well count against him, but for that constituency that is left within the Conservative Party that's not completely thrilled to the idea of either Brexit or a hard Brexit, then he may appeal to them. But I think in the wider contest amongst the Tory leadership, the Tory membership, you'll see such a strong support for Brexit. I think that would damage his chances there.
Do you think that some of those people that have gone to this new Brexit party with Farage?
No question. I think there's some studies are showing, the majority of Tory voters voted Brexit Party in the European elections. And that's the big problem that they have. And certainly they've now announced the Brexit Party, they're going to stand at the next Scottish parliamentary elections. That may change, but that's what they said. And I think that will cause the Tories real consternation because they harvested much of the Tory vote here in Scotland during the European elections.
Mm-hmm. Then we've got the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid.
Yes, who Ruth Davidson says that she is supporting, which probably doesn't do his chances much good at all. Not that she doesn't carry from weight, I'm sure she does in the Conservative Party, but her record of backing winners is not a good one. She tends to flip and flop around. She was totally against Boris Johnson, even being part, we're told, of a campaign operation, something or other, to make sure that he didn't win, and now comes out and says she can work with him. So I'm not sure how much her support will weigh in his favour. But again, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, of course, she got them all up to the party conference of the Conservatives, didn't she? These fellows from down in Westminster.
Although she refused Boris Johnson to come to that, right enough.
Yeah, and it was kind of bolstered the numbers, maybe, I don't know.
Yep. So she said or some of the ones, I think we've always been surprised by the number of people who've declared for it. There were 13 at one stage, now down to 10. So, we'll see. It's still fairly open.
Now we've got a lot to say about the next fellow, because there's something else we've got in our little manifesto here for him later on. But the former Foreign Secretary, the most controversial of the candidates, I suppose, the one who's most well known. And I did say to an audience just post the referendum for the EU, who voted for Boris to be Prime Minister. And everybody said, no. That was the response from that audience. And that was back in 2016. So, comment about Boris then?
Well, this statement, apart from all the other things you could say about Boris Johnson, his shocking record as Foreign Secretary, where your main job is to build bridges and be diplomatic with other countries, and he failed miserably in that. And the Iranian situation with the woman that's imprisoned there jeopardised her freedom as well. So he's got a terrible track record. But today, or at least over the weekend, to announce that he wants to make sure that people in Scotland pay higher national insurance charges in order to fund tax cuts for the wealthiest south of the border. I don't know who comes up with these policies, but I'm pretty sure that with Boris Johnson, as with many of the others, Scotland is not even given a passing thought in these things. And I think it's a real lesson for people in Scotland to watch this and to see the extent to which any rights we have under devolution are trampled upon, they're ignored, they're not even understood, I think, by the majority of the people involved in this. As it appears, some of the place names that we have in Scotland are not understood by some other candidates as well. So I think it's the contempt that's being shown for Scotland. Now, we're told that there's this hugely sophisticated campaign behind Boris Johnson, unlike the last time. And it's all very measured and calculated. Well, if that is the case, how can he come out with such an absolutely destructive policy for the people of Scotland? To say, we want to charge you higher national insurance contributions so you can contribute to the richest people just south of the border, not in Scotland, having a tax cut. I don't know who comes up with this, but whoever it was not thinking of the people in Scotland. And I would say to people in Scotland watching this is what a Tory government at Westminster and a potential Boris Johnson Prime Minister means for Scotland. Utter contempt and disregard.
Yeah, a tax. I read in one article this morning about that being really a tax cut for 3 million people in the richest 3 million people of the...
Which just coincidentally includes MPs, of course. And who is he trying to win the support of just now? MPs. So to give a bribe to MPs on the back of Scottish taxpayers, I mean, it's just appalling.
And it also, something I thought of, and I don't know if it's true really, but it does put into question some of the devolution measures, doesn't it? Because Derek Mackay has some powers now over the different rates of taxing and stuff, but he does not have any power over the national insurance, and yet that national insurance does affect everybody here in Scotland. And of course, it's really the Westminster government then affecting Derek Mackay's possibilities in what he's able to do.
In that case, that is true, and also in the case, I forget which one it was it Michael Gove that proposed massive reductions or even abolition of VAT? Well, VAT is not controlled by the Scottish Government, but it's assigned to the Scottish Government. This would hugely affect that, but once again, no thought whatsoever given to the implications for Scotland. And you'd think that the 13 Tory MPs from Scotland would be speaking up and saying, you must realise how destructive this is to the Conservative position in Scotland, but apparently not.
Well, we'll come back to Boris in a minute, but we've got the former leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom, who got a bit upset with Mrs May a week or two ago and resigned and stamped her foot. Another woman for 10 Downing Street?
Well, it's funny, I didn't know much about her at all the last time that she stood and got defeated by Theresa May, but she didn't seem to come from anywhere as far as I was aware, and yet she's done some substantial work in the meantime as leader of the House, a high-profile position. She's well regarded by a number of people in the House, not necessarily for her politics, but for what she's done. And I think she's really struggling. I think I was almost surprised today to find out that she'd got the necessary signatures to go forward. So I'm not sure she's going to feature in the final running.
And then we've got another lady, woman, I'm not sure if I say the right word, I chose the right word. But she seems to me to be the hardest of the whole bunch in a way, the former Work and Pensions Secretary Esther McVey.
Yeah, I think for most people in Scotland, certainly for someone like me being on the Scottish Parliament Social Security Committee, and also in the area I represent with its substantial levels of deprivation, to see the havoc that universal credit has wrought on people's lives, and to see how contemptuous she was of the Scottish Parliament in terms of responding to the concerns that were made, I find it hard to see how anybody could support somebody like Esther McVey. And of course, she's now refusing, I understand, to rule out the idea of proroguing Parliament, of taking Parliament out of the equation so she can better force through a no-deal Brexit. So I think just beyond the pale.
Yeah, it's a question of democracy there.
That's right.
And then the last one on my list is International Development Secretary Rory Stewart.
Well, people say that he has had the most novel campaign, and that may well be true. He's now routinely referred to as Rory the Tory. However, I do find it very hard to see a situation where he could get the necessary votes to make it into the last two. In fact, I think he's probably likely to fall before that stage. And also, some of the comments he's made about the union, I think, basically misunderstand the issue that people in Scotland have with different aspects of the union. It's not that you just have to be told and shouted at more frequently. It has to be changes that are made to it, and I don't see him doing that. But as I say, I don't expect him to feature in the final two.
And it seems that he's got quite a lot of money coming his way for his campaign from somebody in the Soviet Union. Apparently has donated £10,000 to his campaign. Why would you need £10,000 to run a leadership campaign in the Tory party?
Well, I suppose it could be used for things which are campaigning. It can be used for merchandise. It can be used for the hire of halls. But there are strict rules which govern this, and I know that. I was on the Scottish Parliament Standards Committee, and you'll remember the controversy that we had there previously with Wendy Alexander. So these things are scrutinised, and they will be scrutinised. Quite legitimate for candidates to raise money for these things. Why they would need that much money, who knows? But we're also seeing another leadership contribution. Understand that Joe Swinson, who's going for the Lib Dem leadership at the same time, has had £10,000 from somebody involved in fracking. So I understand, and apologies if that's wrong. And I do think there is something about where money comes from. Both transparency is very important, to know where it's come from and what it's for, but also knowing where it's come from, if it's come from a credible source or one that's not looking to try and get some kind of influence through that. It's really important. So it will be interesting to see the accounting for all of this once these contests are done.
And also, I think I saw something today about the Brexit Party having put something on their website now that says you've got the amount of donation and where it comes from or something. I don't know. It's a vague thing in my mind. Did you see that? No?
I didn't. There are strong rules which I know the Brexit Party has been subject to a visit by the Electoral Commission, which was around things like their diligence. I think it mainly centres, as it does for all political parties, on contributions that may come from out with the UK, and there are strict rules in relation to that. So if that is the case, and I don't know that, if a disclaimer has been put up today or some further instruction, you'd wonder why that wasn't put up during the course of the major fundraising they did for the European elections, if that was the case. But
yeah, I mean, it does cost a lot to print things up, but my kind of thought is, at the moment, Rory Stewart is trying to get the backing of a number of people in the House of Commons. It doesn't need money to go any further. And to talk to, I mean, how many Tory MPs are there? I can't remember. But I mean, it's not that many people. I mean, you could go and knock on all their doors, and we always go chapping the doors to do things. I'm talking about people who are members of political parties. They chap the doors and they knock on the street doors. But in this particular case, they've only got to walk down a corridor in Westminster, or
Well, that's true, but I think, I don't know why I'm putting the case for Conservative candidates and how they conduct themselves during this election. I suppose some of them will see this as a seamless process. They want to see it through to the final stages, and so travelling the country to garner support will be important, certainly for MPs from around the country, but also if it goes to the membership, there's a limited time in which they can garner that support. So it may be for both purposes, I'm not sure.
I got you. I understand. All right, so we kind of covered Boris Johnson's tax break for the rich, with paid for by national insurance contributions from Scotland. But also, I mean, he picks up a lot of money, doesn't he, from various speech making, and we've mentioned this before in our programmes here at Broadcasting Scotland, but I mean, I wonder where all his funding comes from, and the general malaise of all that business. Do you want to continue in that a little bit more?
Well, he's apparently the highest paid columnist in the UK. Some extraordinary six-figure sum he gets for his column.
I think it was 270.
That sounds about right.
$1,000 a year.
So that's, of course, on top of what is a very good salary as MP.
77 or something.
Around that, and obviously prior to that, he was the Foreign Secretary, so paid 140,000, whatever it is, as a senior.
And then, of course,
minister.
he got into trouble for not declaring a house that he gets rent on. He owns a part share in a big mansion place that was up before and then, of course, he's had several books that he hasn't announced to the people of the authorities in the House of Parliament just recently, and been wrapped over the knuckles for that.
I mean, it's where do you stop and start with Boris Johnson? There was the stuff which I read on Twitter today, and I don't know if it's true, that he'd been forced to leave the Times for making up quotes when he was a journalist with them.
Yes, I read that too. He made up a quote.
There's one where he discusses, apparently, according to Twitter today, somebody being beaten up with somebody else. There's so much with Boris Johnson, and also the flip-flopping over whether he was leave or remain. Apparently it was a marginal decision, but now he's meant to be a complete wholehearted gung-ho leaver. He's just not a credible figure, and I think because he's not a credible figure here, he's not a credible figure with those countries that he talked to when he was Foreign Secretary. The rumours are that he was the worst briefed, he was less inclined to have read his brief and to know the background. And I think especially in that job, the relationships with different countries is extremely important. And of course that is the preeminent job of whoever wins this contest, to talk to other countries, and in particular the EU, about how things move forward. So I find it extraordinary that somebody who many people in the Conservative Party have for many years ruled out the possibility of him becoming, I think there's a number I've said he would actually leave the Conservative Party if he became Prime Minister. And yet now he is, without question, the favourite to win that job.
Yeah. So before we move on to the next little item I've got on my programme here, if they were to put the national insurance up here, this is going to have a big effect on a lot of people here in Scotland. I don't know, you probably haven't got any figures in your head, but I wondered what it would cost people. I mean, well, of course, we don't know the exact figures, but it will affect a lot of people here in Scotland, everybody.
Well, no question, and it's the fact that he's actually mentioned that it will come from, amongst other areas, including the $39 billion he's not going to pay for the UK's debts to the EU.
But I mean, that thing, we just have to cover that a bit, don't we? Because that's an international law. It's an agreement made it's been signed by the former Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's caretaker now, that has to be paid. Otherwise, international sanctions will come upon the United Kingdom. Is that not right?
Well, the French are saying that. They're saying it's equivalent to a sovereign debt breach, and it'll have the same implications in terms of borrowing.
And who
to
the
the
heck
UK.
is going to want to trade with some people who won't pay their debts?
Well, that's right. But even more pointedly, the fact is Theresa May discussed and agreed this deal in good faith with the EU, who also acted in good faith. And they've got the right to expect if they enter a deal with the UK, that is the deal. Mm-hmm. And it's now been not just amended or asking for elements of it to be opened again. It's actually been thrown in the bin by Boris Johnson's statement that he's going to hold back this £39 billion, which are things like pension payments for people that we've employed or commitments that we've made over many years, the UK has made over many years. And it's an act of very bad faith, and that's why the French have already said it will be the equivalent to reneging on sovereign debt, and it'll have the same implications. The UK will become a risk, and it'll become an outsider in terms of the capital markets.
And who in the rest of the world is going to want to trade on those sort of terms?
Exactly right.
And then, they bandy this thing about, World Trade Organization, but this is another minefield, but let's not get into that now because we haven't got enough time. So let's move on from the Tory party and let's go to the other side of the coin, because there was another extraordinary story that I read this weekend about Mr. Corbyn, who, to my mind, I know that he's been saying that this is what goes on in their conference and what they decided in their party conference, but these little tiny integral steps, it seems to make Mr. Corbyn look as if he's going from one thing to another and flip-flopping around. But here is a flip-flop of the most gigantic proportions, because in England, where Jeremy is the king, he said, no, I'm not up for another referendum. He's obviously been wanting a general election for a long time. But here, Richard, the leader of the Labour, said, "Oh, we're backing a second referendum." What can anybody make of that?
Well, I think the worst thing about it is not just the inconsistency, it's the dishonesty. The reason why Labour are trying to ride two horses is because they're scared to alienate either section, and they have supporters, especially in the north of England, that are strongly pro-Brexit, and they do not want to be seen to be supporting a referendum, and that's why they don't use the word referendum. They'll say a public vote instead. And also, they have not talked about, or they have talked about, the fact that they've said, one of the senior spokesperson said recently, we are a Brexit party. Jeremy Corbyn has talked about having a Labour Brexit, a Lexit from the... So, on that basis, he supports Brexit. And also, they supported for the revocation of Article 50. And then you have, in Scotland, where Labour has been absolutely decimated, in fact, worse than decimated, which means to reduce by 10%, decimated at the European elections, and so they have now realised how damaging this is to them. And so the Scottish Labour Party has said, no, we want to have a referendum, and not just that, we want to campaign for Remain, which has to be on the ballot paper. That's not the position in London. Scottish Labour admit the fact that if it comes to a UK general election, it's the UK Labour Party, the UK NEC, that will decide what the policy in the manifesto is. So Scottish Labour's attempt to move towards a referendum and campaigning for Remain, it goes out the window. It's a fundamentally dishonest proposition, and I think to hear Paul Sweeney at the weekend saying, well, it's just a timetabling thing, as soon as they get the chance to consider it down south, they'll fall into line with Scottish Labour. Well, I think that's treating his colleagues with contempt, but I'm not sure that's what's going to be the outcome. But the more important and fundamental point for Labour, and I thought this was something that would be obvious to them after the European elections, is the long-term decline is not going to stop until they address the national question in Scotland of independence. Do they want to continue to be the secondary, hardline unionist party behind the Conservative Party, even denying the democratic demands of people in Scotland for a referendum? Or do they at last realise they're going to have a change? Whether or not it's to support independence, that's a question for them, and if it's not, it's not. But they have to acknowledge the democratic right of the people of Scotland. And so far, there's been no change in the Labour Party in the Scottish Parliament, and no sign of change. It may be going on under the surface, I don't know. No sign of change from Labour that realise what an existential threat their current position is for them.
And that kind of brings us to the next bit, which would be the previous referendum from 2014, and moving on to the possibility of a referendum coming up in the next year or two. But there were a heap of promises made to the Scottish people by various different politicians, the Prime Minister of the time. I've got a whole big list of them. I don't know how many we can pick off in the time we've got available. But of course, the first and the biggest one, and the SNP polled more votes than any other party in the whole of the European Union the other day, which says an enormous amount about Scottish people and about the SNP itself, I'm sure. But the biggest promise made by those people was that if you vote for their no, we would stay in the European Union. I'm sure you've got one or two things you could tell me about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could not have been more explicit. I don't think the SNP were the highest vote in the EU, but perhaps the highest in Western Europe, a political party, with 39%. But you're right, Ruth Davidson was explicit. What is the way, this is what the No campaign said, how do you guarantee Scotland's place in the EU? You vote no, that's what they said. It's voting yes that puts it in jeopardy. That was their proposition. There's also statements from Ruth Davidson about how wrong it would be for, and there's two or three of them, how wrong it would be for a Tory UK government to refuse to allow a referendum in Scotland on independence. And she's right in that, and she's wrong in the position she now holds, which once again is a complete reversal from her previous position. But there's been any number of promises which have been breached. We were told that they took a cardboard cutout of me around different tax offices, saying that I was a threat to these tax jobs. So those tax jobs are going. East Kilbride, Livingston, they're going under a no vote. I did a number of debates with the trade unions on shipbuilding in the Clyde, and again we're told, was it separation shuts shipyards? I have to be very careful how I said that there. But these were the things that they put out there, and they've gone back on them one after another. And yet there's no willingness to acknowledge the fact that just because they're going back and changing their mind on these things, that the people of Scotland don't have the right to change their mind as well. And increasingly people in Scotland are changing their mind. And going right back up to date with the Boris Johnson thing and this leadership contest, the contempt that's been shown for people in Scotland is leading more and more people to change their mind. Perhaps the high point of that was when Ian Blackford and his colleagues had to walk out from the UK Parliament. And that was specifically to demonstrate the extent to which Scotland's voice has been completely ignored in relation to Brexit. And that put 7,000 new members into the SNP. So I think they really have to ask themselves, why is it the case 12 years into an SNP government, the SNP are still polling around 40%, still above all the other parties, and why support for independence is growing.
And there's one here, it says that power lies within the people of Scotland. In a joint statement, 5th of August 2014, David Cameron and the Scottish Tory leader Ruth Davidson, along with other party leaders, signed a pledge saying, "Power lies with the Scottish people, and we believe it is for the Scottish people to decide how Scotland is governed." Didn't they say that in another great document of Scotland before, some years back in the past?
Yeah. Well, that is right. And of course, it's obviously they believe that until it becomes inconvenient to believe that, and they then change their mind. And this is the point I make about Ruth Davidson changing her mind on so many things. The other good example, since we're talking about Brexit, is she was for Remain. Boris Johnson was shocking, and she was for Remain. And then the day after the referendum, she demanded, or very soon afterwards, demanded in the Scottish Parliament chamber of Nicola Sturgeon protect Scotland's place in the single market. She's now demanding that we come out of the single market. There is no consistency. So it really is whatever suits the interests of her party is what she's going to support. But that doesn't carry with the people of Scotland. They were right when they said power rests, sovereignty rests with the people of Scotland. And you can't limit their right to self-determination. It exists. And they will fold on this issue. I've said from the time that they've said there'll be no referendum, they will refuse, or in the words of her favoured Tory candidate to be Prime Minister, he won't allow people in Scotland to have a referendum. Well, we'll see what happens. I don't think that position is sustainable. And even people like Andy McKeever, former spin doctor for the Tories, has said it's not sustainable and it will fold.
Okay. What else have we got here? Extensive new powers. Well, they seem to have taken back a lot of powers. We're not giving new powers here. There was, 70% of Scottish taxes, 85% of current welfare, blah, blah, blah. Cross-party devolution. The EU government poll says blah, blah, blah. Michael Gove, but extensive new powers. Did any of those ever come our way?
Well, many of them did, there's no question, in terms of the tax raising powers and powers over social security, but what we didn't predict, of course, was the attempt to use Brexit to claw back powers to the UK. which many people would argue is a material change in circumstances. That is a change to the devolution settlement, this idea that Westminster will decide. And I think, although there are, of course, areas where common frameworks make good sense, and the Scottish Government said that, Mike Russell said that to the UK Government, the idea they can just take these powers back in the teeth of the opposition, not just of the SNP, but of the Scottish Parliament, I think is a fundamental affront to devolution. So they have not remained true to the word in relation to that. And also I think it's quite clear to see that some of the powers which have been applied don't fit well. You find this a lot in the Social Security Committee. There's not a consistency to which powers are exercised where. I, of course, would always argue for all powers to come to Scotland. That's my position. But there's got to be a sensible approach to this as well.
What about the Scotland Act? Would they change that?
Well, who knows? It depends who gets in and how emboldened they feel. I do think that the early days and weeks of a new Prime Minister are going to be so dominated by Brexit. I think Scotland's not going to get a look in once again. It'll be the age-old thing of there are more important things. In fact, one of them said this, I think, not in so many words. There's more important things to discuss now than Scotland. In fact, that was Theresa May's position in relation to Brexit. This is more important. Scotland can wait its turn. Well, Scotland will decide when it wants to have its say. And Nicola Sturgeon said there will be a referendum before during the term of this mandate, and Mike Russell said it may have to be sooner than that, depending on if it's a no-deal Brexit. So it's the people of Scotland that will decide how they want and when they want to move forward.
Yeah, we've still got quite a few bits and bobs in here. There's renewables, and we talked about the HMRC jobs. You brought that in a minute ago. Carbon capture, and there was the social security. We've been building a new social security system, haven't we, with Jean Friedman, and then subsequently with
Shirley Ann Somerville.
Yeah, sorry, say that again.
Shirley Ann Somerville.
Yes,
yep.
sorry,
Yep.
Shirley. Her name disappeared from my head just for a moment. The English votes for English laws. I think they got that together, didn't they? Because there's quite a few times when Scottish MPs are not allowed to vote in various issues. And yet some of those issues do affect us in Scotland.
That's right. And oddly, it's the Tory MPs that frequently forget the fact they're not allowed to participate in these debates, and they do so anyway. But of course, I think that's when a lot of people who perhaps through gritted teeth voted no to independence in 2014, on the morning after saw David Cameron come out and immediately retrench the situation and make it about English votes for English laws. I think a lot of people thought, well, that's not what we were talking about. That's not what we expected here. We're trying to see if this vow with these huge new powers, the most powerful parliament, federal type parliament and the devolved parliament in the world, how that's going to work. And suddenly it's talking about how to take powers away from MPs from other parts of the UK and in the UK Parliament. So, yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary what happened in relation to that.
I mentioned this to Philippa Whitford the other day about a lady I met just around the time of the European election. And she comes from just south of our border. And she said, well, you Scots, you're all right. You've got all these lovely free things like education for the universities and free prescriptions and things. And, of course, the answer to that is, well, change your government and change what you've got down there. This is what the Scottish people have elected for, and that's why they voted for the SNP government that we've got currently. But this Barnett formula thing is another thing that was championed around the place, and the vow that they made. But this Barnett formula, is it true that more money goes south than comes north?
Well, I think there are questions about the Barnett formula, not so much that it hasn't been retained, because it has. It's how new things can be announced and yet don't seem to be impacted by the Barnett formula, which of course ensures that Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland get their fair share. Perhaps the biggest example is the £1 billion bung to the DUP, where none of that money was to come to Scotland, or commensurate money to come to Scotland or Wales. So I think there's a contempt that's been shown for the Barnett formula. It's a really important point there.
Yeah, and then there's another little thing. This is fresh in, which is the broken Tory promise about the licence fees for the over 75s. As the BBC scraps this, it must be today, because that's the date on the top of the sheet I've got here. It was only at 15:07 today that this was released, this information.
It's absolutely disgraceful. The Tories are now trying to say it's down to the BBC, forgetting, of course, that George Osborne was the one that told the BBC they had to fund this, even though it's a decision taken by the government, the previous Labour government, to have this free licences for over 75s. They then said the Tories had to be funded by the BBC. So they've not said what the BBC would have to cut to do it, so the BBC has chosen this cut. But this originates from 10 Downing Street, and every pensioner, first of all, those that were affected by the recent change in pension credits itself, which is very important. That's where not both members of a household or a relationship are pensioners are now to lose out in that benefit.
£7,000.
Yep. And already with appallingly low levels of take-up in the first place, as you say, 7,000, and that's affecting thousands of people across Scotland. Over and above that now, for some people, you know, the TV is their window on the world. It's absolutely, and they will not...
Company for people.
That's right. It's absolutely crucial. And, you know, Christina McKelvey in the Scottish Parliament is doing a lot of work in the Scottish Government, rather, in terms of loneliness amongst older people as well, which is part of her remit. And this has got to be seen as a retrograde step. And I think the Tories will suffer badly for this. This and the admission from Trump that the NHS was to be in the table in any future trade deal. These things are really important to people, and I think the Tories are absolutely playing with fire, taking away or imposing a tax, essentially a licence fee on people that have long since passed retirement age to find that money from fixed incomes, and also this idea of the NHS being fair game for some US trade deal. I think they have lost the plot completely, and they're losing support in Scotland, as was seen in the European elections.
Yeah, I noticed that Mr. Fox has managed to put 12 trade deals across now. Not all of them at the same level as he got with the European Union, but managed to get to 12 at last. And yet he said that was going to be as easy peasy as it could easy be.
Yeah. And the big ones are nowhere near. There was one of the candidates, I forget which one now, had said that they would do, I think it might have been Gove, there'd be a Canada-style deal done before Brexit. Now, that took 10 years of work between the EU and Canada. These things can't be done overnight. And the UK does not have people trained in this because it's been done for us by the EU over many years. And the Canadians are loving this. One said to me, we will take them to the cleaners because we have the experience. We deal with the Americans in terms of NAFTA. You don't have that experience. And it's the naivety that's being shown, the contempt and the disregard for people's lives, because this will affect jobs, it'll affect trade, it'll affect investment. And it's the kind of unicorns that are being trotted out that are going to be resolutions to this. They're just nonsensical.
Yeah. I see that Ian Blackford and Murray Black are going around doing various different get-togethers and talking about a possible second referendum.
Which I think is great, although it should not be forgotten that around the country these events are happening. In any event, I'm going to ESR Broth, I think, this week, and there are events happening. There's a lot of activity going on, but I think it's a great initiative from Ian and Mary to do that because people want to hear that now. They want to hear what the option, what the lifeboat is to get out of this Brexit madness.
And then I hear that you and Jackson Carlaw had a bit of a... don't know what word to use, on the STV channel. Maybe we shouldn't advertise them. But,
well, it started with Broadcasting Live because of the Independence Movement event in Aberdeen where I was interviewed.
Broadcasting Scotland, it was us.
Broadcasting Scotland, sorry, yes.
It's a mixture of the other one, yeah.
That's true, yes. So you guys initiated it. So
it was our fault, was it?
Well, I was asked a question quite legitimately about the Tory government's refusal to countenance a second referendum. And I made what I thought was a fairly straightforward point is that as far as the Scottish Government is concerned and the Yes Movement, you shouldn't factor into your calculations or when you think it's right for people in Scotland to have a referendum on this, the possibility that Westminster will say, we're not going to let you. I'm not saying they won't do that, but that shouldn't be what is in your mind. You should decide you want to have a referendum and then you deal with that subsequently. That was translated by Jackson Carlaw into what he called a wildcat referendum. In fact, people like him and Murdo Fraser started calling me Keith Wildcat Brown, which, fair enough.
Well, there's hats to put on.
Well,
a couple of six guys.
So I'd written to him at the time and said, happy to, or he'd written to me, I can't remember which, and I said, well, happy to debate these issues with you. And he came back and said, well, I'm an acting leader just now because Ruth's away, so I kind of outrank you, but maybe when we're both deputy leaders again. So we happened to be on the TV in a show, and I challenged him again to do that, and he agreed and said he was going to murder me. I'm not sure why he said that, but that's what he said. And
does he know that's against the law?
I would hope so. Maybe he's got other confessions to make. I don't know. I think, to be fair to him, it was a a turn of phrase. But he then tried to change the basis of the debate, which was always to be about this idea of a second referendum and whether it's justified or not, and also to make sure it was held in his constituency under his conditions. But I think we've now agreed it will be held in a neutral venue, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
All right, keep us posted. We'll definitely advertise it, and if we've got a chance, we'll come and film it too.
Okay.
So, Keith, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. It's wonderful to have a man with such knowledge. When you're in my position, it's always very precarious because I never know what people are going to say to me. I never know what I'm going to have to talk about, and sometimes I know nothing.
Well, you do a very good job.
But thank you very much, and we hope that you'll grace our studios again in the not too distant future.
Sure will. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So there's the end of Broadcasting Scotland for tonight, and tomorrow we'll be back with some more surprises. So have a good sleep, have a good evening, and thanks for watching now. Bye-bye.